we arrived basically just to compare notes. Like we weren't thinking about issuing a statement or anything, but we realized that we'd arrived at the same place regarding the strategy of how to manage the pandemic. The summer had seen a decline in cases. There's some spread in like Arizona and the South and some countries, but the threat of March seemed to have subsided. But it was really clear from the data that the disease was coming back in the fall, that there was going to be spread of the disease again. And it was also clear to me as a social scientist looking at the pattern of political action that the lockdowns were also going to come back because the fear was not gone, the disgust was not gone, all of that was still in place. All the infrastructure for the lockdowns were there. And so what we wrote this very short document, 1 page long, called the Great Barrington Declaration. We wrote it in very simple language because we wanted to reach regular people. Because I thought to myself, and we thought to ourselves, that it was really regular people that needed to know that there wasn't a consensus in favor of the lockdown.
Yep.
That people were being misled, that the idea that all scientists agreed that there was a consensus, that the science said, let's lock down, was not true.
Yep.
In fact, many, many reputable scientists disagreed with that, and yet they stayed silent because of the fear of social ostracism, fear of, Tony Fauci controls billions of dollars of federal money for research. What's not just the money so that you can do your experiments, it controls the social status of scientists. You don't get tenure at a top university, medical university, unless you get NIH funding.
Yep.
In the United States. So it's the social status as well as even more than the money itself.
Well, it's not just the social status either. We should be clear about that. It's also your livelihood itself, right? So it isn't merely the fact that you want to elevate yourself up the status hierarchy. It's that you want to keep your job. And so this is nuts and bolts. This is nuts and bolts material here. Yeah, I was very ill when the Great Barrington Declaration came out, so I wasn't as, aware of everything that was going on as I might have been under different conditions. But one of the things I do remember, and I've been struck by this continually, is that while it was demonized and put off to the side as the work of essentially like scientific outsiders and extremists. And what's so interesting about that, I found this repeatedly because I've talked to a lot of reprehensible people over the last few years, such as yourself. And I found that even though I know as well as anyone how easy it is for people to be demonized for their views and how often that's purely an invention of psychopathic narcissists, very often, trying to score points at the expense of someone's reputation. It's still the case that even the smallest slur in relationship to someone's professional reputation is enough to make even me skeptical about who I'm talking to. Because it's very hard to think, well, if there's enough smoke, there's probably some fire. Right? And that's actually a pretty intelligent rule of thumb decision because there's 7 billion people out there. You're not going to listen to all of them. And so one way you cut through the complexity of figuring out who to listen to is you don't listen to people whose reputations have been savaged. And you don't have time to sort that out like a legal trial, but what it does mean is that reputation savaging can be weaponized. And there are people who are absolutely stellar at that. And the Great Barrington Declaration was definitely savaged, ignored and savaged, both. And so it launched when? And this was in 2020.
Yeah, October 4th, 2020. People that signed, like tens of thousands of doctors and epidemiologists signed it. Nobel Prize winners signed it. Like almost 1 million people have signed it to date. It went viral very rapidly. Like we just put it on a web page and people just found it. And I started getting messages from people saying, thanking me for like saying common sense, protect vulnerable people, lift the lockdowns. Those are the two ideas of the Great Barrington. It's the old pandemic plan. It's the least original thing I've ever written in my entire life. I mean, there's nothing new actually in it.
And certainly nothing radical.
I didn't think so. But 4 days after we wrote it, the head of the National Institute of Health, Francis Collins, wrote an email to Tony Fauci calling the three of us that were the primary co-authors of the declaration fringe epidemiologists.
Right.
And then he called for a devastating published takedown of the premises.
Are you tired of being held back by one-size-fits-all healthcare? Of having your concerns dismissed or being denied that comprehensive lab work you need to truly understand your health? I want to tell you about Merrick Health, the premier health optimization platform that's revolutionizing how we approach wellness and longevity. What sets Merrick apart isn't just their cutting-edge diagnostic labs or concierge health coaching, it's their commitment to treating you as an individual. Their expert clinical team stays at the forefront of medical research, creates personalized, evidence-based protocols that evolve with you. Unlike other services that rely on cookie-cutter solutions, Merrick Health goes the extra mile. They consider your unique lifestyle, blood work, and goals to craft recommendations that actually work for you, whether that's through lifestyle modifications, supplementation, or prescription treatments. And with a remarkable 4.9 out of 5 rating on Trustpilot, you know you're in great hands. The best part is you can get 10% off your order today. Just head to merrickhealth.com and use code Peterson at checkout. That's merrickhealth.com, code Peterson for 10% off. Stop guessing and start optimizing your health today with Merrick Health, because your best life starts with your best health.
I started getting hit pieces written against me in the New York Times, again in the Washington Post, a whole bunch of other. I mean, the CBC hosted a panel of scientists who savaged us as wanting to let the virus rip and kill grandma.
Well, thank God for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. That $1.4 billion of government subsidy a year and a 1.9% market share. They're quite the stellar bunch, boy.
The level of propaganda was remarkable. Like I was calling for focused protection of vulnerable people. I was calling for a conversation among public health people how better to protect old people who were dying in droves as a consequence of not being protected by the lockdowns. I wanted, how you protect old people is complicated, right? So it depends on the local living circumstances of each person, of the old people in the community. The answer in Alberta, in Canada, is going to be very different than the answer in Southern California or something. Right. It's just going to be very different.
All those pesky complexities.
Yeah, well, you need local public health who know the living circumstances to participate in that discussion. Think creatively about how to protect older people when you have this highly infectious respiratory virus pandemic going on. Instead, we were demonized. We were told that it was impossible to protect older people without a lockdown. That the lockdown didn't protect older people. It hadn't in the spring, and it didn't protect them in the fall, and did continue to not protect them. So it essentially they closed the top of the federal public health bureaucracy closed the minds of public health against the possibility of focused protection. By demonizing us, right? And the purpose of the demonization was so that they could tell the public that every reputable scientist, the consensus of scientists, agreed with their plan. Their plan to lock down.
Well, and I suppose the motivation for that was the ability to publicly trumpet the staggering effectiveness and decisiveness of their simple and potent plan to protect, right? And so for me, again, that's a kind of unbelievably narcissistic virtue signaling. Is you want all the credit that would go along with actually dealing with the problem while doing none of the effort whatsoever necessary to actually understand the problem and to implement the complex multidimensional solutions that would be demanded.
Yeah. I mean, I remember seeing a podcast with you and your daughter, I think, during that time. I was quite moved actually by it, both by the devotion your daughter has to you and also the illness you were going through. So I don't think you have anything to I mean, that what you went through was tremendous. Anyway, so we wrote this, started getting. I mean, but the thing is, I was emotionally better prepared to deal with the blowback from that. And it became this like this thing where it was clear that the purpose was to limit the reach of the declaration. Many people still have not heard of it. That probably should have heard of it. And that partly succeeded, but it didn't entirely succeed. The nucleus of this anti-lockdown movement was put in place. And then as time has gone on, what's happened is that anti-lockdown movement, as people have seen the reality, what the lockdowns really have meant. Well, lockdowns is not just you're forced quarantine at home. Lockdown is the ideology that we must keep people apart from each other. the ideology that we have to treat each other as biohazards.
And that the state has the right to impose that from the top down, right, which is a major part of the ideology for everyone's good. You know, one of the things I also knew, and I don't know how much you know about this, and maybe you know a lot about it, you know, the Nazi eradication campaigns started out as public health initiatives. Like the causal pathway is clear. And so and that discussed demonization was part of that process. But it was all put forward initially under the guise of protecting the public and doing the best even for the suffering. So it was the Nazis were extremely good at leveraging a false compassion on the narcissistic front to produce unbelievably pathological outcomes. And that went along also with the notion, the implicit notion that, well, the state has the right to do whatever's necessary if public health is at risk. And it's whatever's necessary. It's like, really, whatever's necessary, eh? Yeah, well, maybe here's my new theory, my political theory, or part of it. If your response to an emergency makes you terrified and tyrannical, and one of the consequences of that is your claim that the emergency justifies the granting of all due power to you, you are not the right leader.